So I'm going to take you first through this interactive project that we released in 2015 called The Deeper They Bury Me, that is basically, about Herman Wallace's life and a little bit about his experience. But then we're going to talk about how it got made and some of the challenges that I faced. So I'm going to start with a trailer that just kind of introduces the site and how it works.
If you dropping a little drop of water on my forehead every microsecond, and I focus on that, eventually that drop will feel like a ton of bricks falling on my head. But if I don't focus on it, and I focus my attention on something else, that drop of water is not going to harm me.
One for the bushes and the tree so tall.
So decades in a cell, Kings has become a part of my existence. So the reason why they're keeping us locked up, it ain't got nothing to do with the death of the God. It's got everything to do with our political beliefs.
I have a collect call from Herman Wallace and inmates at Louisiana State Penitentiary to accept Dial 5.
Come on, man. The reality is, the truth will set you free.
Walk like a bushy, walk too slow. Walk like a bushy, walk too slow.
All right. Oh, thank you. So now I'm going to show you a little bit about the site, because I don't think me talking about the site is going to work if you have no idea how the site functions. But that being said, we're going to spend a few minutes on it, and there's a lot more content that you're not going to see that I'm not going to take you through. And you'll see me skipping content as a result.
Okay, here's the deal.
So as Sally mentioned, Herman spent over 40 years in the cell and was one of the longest serving solitary confinement prisoners on earth.
I have a collect call from Herman Wallace and inmates at Louisiana State Penitentiary to accept Dial 5.
You have 20 minutes left on this call. Okay, I'm back.
So the idea with the site was
Just because I'm in a cell don't mean that I can't do the things that what you would be able to do.
So the idea of the site was really, to the best of our ability, take you into Herman's world, Herman's reality, and really his
depends
experience.
Upon the individual and how they.
So this is a to scale model of the cell that he spent 40 years in, 23 hours a day, 7 days a week, sometimes 24, and we modeled it, and then we thought this would be a way to kind of tell you what exactly he thinks about it and then how he survived his reality.
I used to get Irish potatoes, and put them in a jar, like a mayonnaise jar, something like that. And I used to take and put water into the jar and let it sit there. As it rots, it begins to get little stubs, and from those knots would go stem, but it would get to a certain point and it would stop. The reason that I concluded, I'm not a scientist, I ain't gonna say I'm not a scientist, I am a damn scientist. I believe that it was the environment. It's like a fish, if you put a fish in a damn aquarium, a small aquarium, he's not going to outgrow that aquarium. Now, but if you were taking to him in food, that same fish, it would expand up to 12 inches. So it's the same thing with human life.
So Herman, like all of us, had to work within his reality. His reality was this 6 foot by 9 foot cell, 23 hours a day, but it didn't mean he didn't try to make it his own, try to bring whatever he could to it. And I think, that's what made it possible to survive, to not feel like that was what was controlling him. So the other kind of world, that I'm going to show you
It's
is...
what I'm going through. It's what I see. It's what I experience.
So Herman always has things to say as well.
The idea was Jackie's when she was doing a project and she called upon.
So one of the things that's really interesting when you think about reality is like, how do you define what's real, right? Like, there's really no way, it's very hard to do. And what Herman did, and Herman had worked with this amazing artist, Jackie Summel, is they created this fantasy world. He created a fantasy house from his cell that he wanted to live in. And this was, the artist, Jackie Summel, basically asked him this question, what kind of world do you dream of?
I
and
think
in a way,
we get somewhere here.
It's through the dream house, and this is a model of his dream bedroom, which he came up with all the design elements, what he wanted and where he wanted it, that we actually learn more, in some ways, about Herman himself.
Well, the bathroom is big because we talk a great deal about myself. And so there was no way that I would take any of a bathroom that was the same size or smaller than the cell that I live in. And this is why I prefer to have this extra compartment within that shower, closed off, where a person can have some privacy. It's the privacy thing that I constantly focus upon versus the non-privacy that I experience in prison. Everything shows its opposite in comparison with this house. And I wanted that bathroom in such a way that you can sit on the stool and appreciate water or waterfalls. So, I don't know. I've been out of commission for 43 years, man. So I don't know. I can only dream.
So that was his way of having, some control over his reality. And that's what's so interesting, is by not being in it, is by dreaming. And that's something that we can all do, right? Get out of where we are by imagining something else. So that's all I'm going to show you the site. Unfortunately, there's a lot more in there.
When I was young.
But we don't have that much time. And I hope that it's just this, I saw this just as a sample that then hopefully you guys will check it out on your own after. This is a website, it's free, all of you can go there and play with it for as long as you want. And this is some Twitter stuff that you could do to get it out there. So how did I get here? So I wanted to, Sally asked me to say, well, how did you get from where you were to committing yourself for the last 10 years or so to this story, and Herman's story and the story of solitary confinement? Well, unfortunately, like a lot of stories, it starts with this guy, because this guy, he had a lot of impact on all of our lives. Let's just be honest that he was president for a long time, and he made a really crazy decision with other people, but I'm going to call him out because I think he made the decision to invade a country that really had nothing to do with, anything about our security, anything like that. And so when he invaded Iraq, I was totally shocked. I was like, what does this have to do with anything? And I don't know if any of you guys were around or involved at that time, but I really thought this was a kind of political awakening for me, because I hadn't thought that people just go to war for nothing. So what I did, and I hope some of you would have also done or would do in the future, is I did what a lot of people do. I marched. There were massive marches, million-person marches in the streets, and to me, I'm going to talk about this more, it's like, we're making I make films and I make now interactives. This was my first one. But I think we also always have to remember, the reality is without the marches in the streets, without the actual things happening, there's nothing to make a film about. There's no action to have in your film, in your website, in whatever creative project you have. And so just to really honor those real experiences where we're doing stuff to try to change something. So at this march, this was in 2003, I met Jackie. So she's the artist who came up with, the concept, and she had been already writing Herman to have him imagine his dream home. And, I thought it was a really cool, fascinating project, in part because it allowed us to access a world people aren't used to. And it did in a creative way. It didn't in a way that people may not expect, because it was really about what is this dream house, what kind of imagination would a person have who's been in solitary for 40 years. So asking her permission and talking to Herman, I did a little bit which is what I know to do, which is I make documentaries. So I made a very straightforward, linear documentary. It was 80 minutes, it showed on PBS, it showed in theaters. But it was something I knew. It was something I had been used to, because that's kind of my experience. I come from a filmmaking background. And I was very pleased with it. I mean, it did very well, but there was something that was always felt lacking from it. And that was basically, I had been talking to make this film to Herman for about 5 years. And like Sally was writing Herman, I was actually talking to him on the phone and recording these calls whenever he could. So I had about 60 hours over these recordings. And to me, this guy is amazing. I mean, there's so much I wanted to share, but I was limited with the documentary. And I was limited by this. I was limited by a structure, a story structure. And that's the reality. Documentaries need to have a beginning, need to have a middle, and they need to have an end. And they're very linear narratives where, if what Herman was saying didn't move the story forward, I basically had to cut it. So we cut, from 60 hours of what ended up of Herman's was maybe 15 minutes in the film. And a lot of it talks about the art project and other things. And that to me was just a tragedy, Here was all this other content that no one was ever going to hear except me. And that was really, really sad to me. And I actually had no idea about interactivity. I'm very not tech savvy. I showed Sally that I'm still on a dumb phone. I don't know if any of you have seen these before. If you're I do not know really, I'm really not a tech person at all, I learned to looked at film when it was still like cutting, images and actual film slides. So I had no idea about this interactive world or what it could do or what it meant. But I met this amazing producer. Her name was Anita Lee, and she said, have you ever thought of doing an interactive with all of this audio? And I was like, well, what is that? She's like, well, you're telling the story non-linearly. I was like, really? That to me is kind of not a story. How does a story work if it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and an end? But, I'll be honest, she was working at the National Film Board, and the National Film Board of Canada had money for this. So I was like, all right, well, if you'll pay me to do this, then sure, let's do it. I can figure it out. So we signed up with an interactive team. These are people who, I had to meet the people who can do this. And their first storyboard looked like this. And I was like, what? I had no idea what was going on. I couldn't read it. I couldn't understand it. There were arrows going in every direction. And I was like, this is what I was used to, and this was the first thing. And I realized, though, that, we were kind of talking different languages, but we had a similar, at least at this point, we had a very similar goal, and we had to figure out a way to negotiate that. And so I kept trying to push, well, I need a beginning, I need a middle, I need an end. And so we got to this. This is our next kind of interactive vision. And as you can see, now there's less arrows, and there's kind of a direction. It's not a full, it's not like what I was used to, but there's kind of a direction. You go from one world to another world, and you have some choice, but you can't go to the second world without first going to the first world. Like, some of the arrows are at least only in one direction. And that was important to me because it meant that you would have this experience of a beginning, middle, and end. And then it got really complicated. I'm just showing you this because it got to a point where, again, I didn't really understand what was going on, but I saw that there was still this linearity, and it was a story. And that was something that I could relate to, and the designers were able to do as well, and gave some people some choice. So to give you a sense, because you haven't gone through the site, there's basically 27 or so 1 to 2 minute videos. Like I showed you 2 of them, and there's 25 others. And so you can choose to some degree the order, but you can't there's not just 27 up there and you can just pick any of them. To some degree, you have to follow an order that we've laid out for you. And then we had to figure out, like, what is it gonna look like and what is it gonna feel like? And this was, where I realized, actually, we can go back to reality. We can go back to the experience that I had, which was calling or having Herman call me on the phone. And that would be a way to actually give it some documentary feeling, some actual reality.
You have 15 seconds left on this call.
So this is this recording that would come up every call I had with Herman, no matter where we were talking. At some point, they'd say, 15 minutes in or 20 minutes in, whatever the timeline was, they say, okay, you have 15 seconds left on the call. And I didn't know when I was going to get a call again. I didn't know if I might not hear from him for another month. But, here I was just a documentary filmmaker, and then I became his friend. But I realized that, this is the reality for the 2 million people in prison in America and millions else in other countries too, that this is how people can talk to their loved ones. And they'll get their 15 minutes, and then 15 seconds before, that's it. They don't get to talk to them anymore. So the hope was maybe the user would get some of that, that some idea that, this is limited. So you will get cut off. You cannot get through the site in the time that is allotted to you. And that was also very hard because I'm like, you're gonna miss stuff. Like I'm designing it so that you're not gonna get through it with something, it's like saying, okay, I'm gonna make a film that's gonna end in the middle, but I was like, that's cool because that's reality. That's reality for the people who have their loved ones in prison, who have friends and family in prison. They don't have that choice. They don't get to decide how long they get to spend with them. So the next kind of challenge I faced is like, how can you make a website look and feel like it's actually real? Because technology, in some way, always takes us away from reality on some level, and that was something I didn't want. And we were working with designers, and they always tried to make it look cool. Because that's what designers, at least my experience, hopefully none of you, but was just like, let's make this look cool. What fonts can we use? How can we make it look like really hip? And I was like, and it took a long time. We actually went through, I think, 3 teams of designers, which is, but I felt because they weren't actually seeing what we saw, and we're really trying to make it look cool. So I'm going to show you some of the early drafts of stuff. So these were the first drafts of those icons that you see in that gray world. And the gray world wasn't even gray. It was this like underwater thing. And this was like, I was like, this has nothing to do with Herman's reality. Now, mind it looks very cool, and the designers were like, this looks really cool. And I was like, yeah, that looks cool, but it's not, it has no connection. So I was like, look, we're talking about a guy who's been in prison. He doesn't know anything about technology. He has no idea of this. So let's try to at least make it hand-drawn. Let's try to make it feel like maybe, it could come from his experience because it's just hand-drawn. And then the guys came with this. Which I was like, they just kind of hand drew. And sorry, that one, the other one on the left got cut, so we didn't even have another version of it. But I'm showing you this other door open one. But just to show, they basically traced over the hand-drawn, the digital image to make it look hand-drawn. And this was a real learning experience for me because as a filmmaker, I've always wanted to collaborate with people. So I have an idea, you have an idea, and we make it work. But I realized that the design team we're working with, they're used to working with clients. And they thought that, okay, well, you want a hand-drawn, I'll just hand-draw it. It wasn't like, how are we going to solve this together? And the other thing I realized is the team that we were working with, they didn't really feel the same connection to the material that I did. They didn't see it and understand it. And I shouldn't say that about everyone on the team, but I'm just being broad. And that's because, look, this was a several $100,000 website. And who are the other people who make several $100,000 websites? It's like Coca-Cola and Exxon. Like, those are the only other groups that spend like $500,000 on a website. So that's who they're used to working with. You know, they're not used to working with activists and documentary filmmakers. And so that was a real learning experience. But luckily, in the end, we were able to find the right team and the right people. And this is what we ended up with. And it was really interesting because how we got here is actually, I went back to the people I worked with on the film and said, look, can you make the images? There's all this animation that you see both in the interactive and the film. And I was like, you already understand what we're trying to do here. You get this idea. And so this is the wagon one, and this is the wagon we ended up with. And it wasn't, and that to me was, it felt somewhat more authentic, and that was what I was trying to get across. And then we had the problem, which as designers you must always have, and we actually had a little technical error this morning with it, is what about a font? What font is going to be from this mind? And there's a million fonts, and they were like, we'll come up with something, it'll look good, da-da-da-da. And then I thought about it, and I was like, wait, we can get an actual real font. And so I just wrote a letter to Herman. And I was like, Herman, can you make us what your handwriting looks like? How can I make this experience that is going to be a website that is totally digital as real as possible? So here was Herman in his 6x9 cell writing out A, B, C, and giving us a font. And that's what we ended up using. And it was kind of like, just trying to bring the documentary process, bring Herman's reality as much as possible into this interactive process. That was really our goal. And these are Herman's actual letters, and this is how we came up with our font.
But come on, man. The reality is, the truth will set you free.
And so Herman had a lot of wisdom, as you'll experience when you go through the site. And really did feel that, if you keep things true, you will have the outcome. Things will change. And as Sally hasn't mentioned, and I'm going to mention it here, so you're going to miss a little bit of the drama in the site, is that Herman did get out. Actually, 3 months after the film aired on PBS, Herman was released from solitary and his conviction was overturned. And actually, Albert Woodfox, was co-defendant, he is not play a big role in the film, but you actually get to hear him in the interactive. Same issue, kept in solitary for the same number of years. He was released about 3 months after the interactive came out in October. So people always ask me, it's like, oh, that's really cool, like, do you think your work had some impact or this and that? And I was like, look, I don't think like the judge watched the movie, and I don't think the judge like went to the interactive and that's how he made his decision. I think there were a lot of people working on their cases, artists, activists, lawyers, who were all working towards this. And I played a small role in that. I made it, I got them a little more attention. And really, we were helping putting out another story. The government had its story. These were radical black militants who were, causing trouble and killed a guard. And we had a story that, these were radical activists who were trying to change the system, and they were targeted for that. And so those were the narratives and those were the stories that were playing out in the media. So this project got recognized by the Columbia Digital Storytelling Lab, and this to me was, it's gotten other accolades and been in festivals and stuff, but this was really cool because it was a project that to me was about storytelling, and they got it. Whoever was on the jury of this thing was like, oh yeah, this is a cool story, and this is a cool way of telling a story, and it maintained the elements of that story. And I put the website down there because there are actually a bunch of other cool stories. I mean, there's 12 other projects, and they're all really cool, so check them out if you want to. But at the same time, I had an issue with this digital storytelling and digital technology, and that's that, I picked this comic because I thought it was kind of funny, but I feel to some degree with this new technology, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's interactive storytelling, we're really like talking to each other. We are saying, who watches virtual reality? Do any of you guys have virtual reality headsets at home? Maybe a few, okay. But this is like a design and creative morning type event. So if I'm in any other audience, it's going to be no one, right? And to be honest, I'm not trying to call out this virtual reality as somehow different than what I did, because the reality is most people go online and watch traditional films. They watch they watch YouTube, they watch Netflix. That's what people consume. They're not into, people aren't watching interactive. And there was a really telling moment where I was talking to some of the activists who had done a lot with the film. I mean, they had shown the film and then had discussions and talked about the issues. And I was like, I showed them the interactive, and they were like, this is super cool, but like, how do you use it? And I was like, oh, this is a problem. We are talking in one language and they are in another language. So I think that's really one of the challenges and things we have to be aware with, is that the reality is that like sometimes we're trying to do stuff that's really technologically advanced, but it may not actually reach the people who need to reach it. And how do we bridge that gap is, I think, the challenges that we face. So one of the things I realized is that, look, because a lot of the people who are going to the site, they probably don't know anything about the issues. Because the people who care about the issues, formerly incarcerated activists, they don't really care about interactive websites. So the least I could do was like get people who think of design, who are interested in interactive, to learn a little bit about what's happening in the website, the uncriminal or unjust criminal injustice world, as Sally pointed out. And as I put this up there also to let people know that this is not just an American problem. I mean, people talk about, the statistics are always, worse when you look at America, but not necessarily. It's just America is huge. But, black Americans are 6 times more likely to be in prison than white Americans. But, in Canada, Aboriginal people, the indigenous people, they account for almost a quarter of the people in prison and only 4% of the population. So what we have is a systems around the globe that are different to their unique context, but all of them are based on this system of kind of racial hierarchy, and all of them have legacies, whether it's in America, it's slavery and the, the colonial process of taking people's land, and in Canada, that's still, they didn't have slavery, but they still, took all the people's lands who lived there. So one of the things I realized when I was thinking about this talk is that, the reality is that like things are changing and things are going to change, but it doesn't happen on its own. And I kind of showing you this picture in relationship with the relation back to the Iraq War protest photo. Because really now people are out there and they're actually fighting to change solitary confinement, and they've had some successes, but they're not, the interactive websites and the films are not going to change this system alone. It takes real activists on the ground, marching, holding press conferences, and it takes the people who are directly impacted being there. So in this case, this is New York. Former prisoners are leading the fight to abolish solitary confinement. And to give you a sense, because I'm assuming we're all New Yorkers, or at least maybe some New Jersey, but mostly New Yorkers, there are about 4,000 people held in solitary just in New York. And definitely take a picture or remember this website. It's not very complicated, but It's the site where you can figure out how to get involved, how to support what's already happening to eliminate solitary. And change is happening, but again, it's going to happen when we really do stuff and we really get out there and we really march and we really try to change things. And we can use the web and we can use films and we can use technology to kind of get us there and to understand that. But I think, to really affect reality, we have to do real things. And that's it. So you can obviously please check out the website, and I'm here for any questions.